My mother-in-law, who hadn't spoken to my husband in over 5 years because he married me instead of the woman she picked out for him, barged into his funeral like a storm. With zero regard for the grief in the room, she claimed I had no right to mourn him. Then she demanded we settle his finances before even proceeding with the funeral. But when I calmly handed her the official documents detailing exactly what her son had left for her, she broke down in tears. Mark and I met in our final year of college. We were both engineering majors, and our mutual love for problem-solving and innovation made us click almost immediately. We grew close fast, moved in together after graduation, and built a beautiful life in the city. We both landed great jobs and began making plans for the future. But there was one major source of friction in our lives. Mark's mother, Evelyn. Evelyn had always envisioned a specific path for Mark's life, and I wasn't part of it. She had long hoped he would marry Sarah, the daughter of one of her close friends. Sarah checked all the boxes Evelyn wanted in a daughter-in-law. Quiet, compliant, and someone who would keep Evelyn at the center of Mark's life. I was the opposite, driven, outspoken, and career-oriented. All traits Evelyn couldn't stand. No matter how hard I tried to get along with her, Evelyn made it clear I wasn't welcome. Still, Mark and I were in love and we were committed to each other. We got engaged a year later, and Evelyn refused to attend the wedding. Not long after, she completely cut ties with Mark, accusing him of betraying her by choosing me over Sarah. In the early days of our relationship, Evelyn occasionally invited us to dinner. Mark and I would show up hopeful that maybe this time she'd make an effort, but each dinner turned into a silent war. Without fail, Sarah and her mother would coincidentally show up too. Evelyn pretended it was unplanned, but we knew better. Throughout the evening, she'd act as if I didn't exist. She'd fawn over Sarah's achievements, talk about how much Sarah and Mark had in common, and drop passive-aggressive comments about how perfect they'd be together. Mark always stood up for me and made an effort to include me in the conversation, but Evelyn didn't care. Her contempt for me was unmistakable, and it was clear she would never stop trying to drive us apart. Even after we were engaged, the dinner invitations from Evelyn didn't stop. She would call Mark and insist on having a family dinner, claiming she wanted to rebuild their relationship and support ours. Each time, we cautiously accepted the invitation, hoping something had changed. But without fail, Sarah and her mother would always be there, as if by some strange coincidence. The same pattern would repeat itself. Evelyn would treat me like I was invisible, constantly praising Sarah and making loaded comments about how perfect she and Mark would have been together. It was emotionally draining. Every dinner chipped away at my spirit, making me feel more and more alienated. Mark saw it, of course. He wasn't blind to the manipulation, but it was still incredibly difficult for him to fully cut off his mother. Despite everything, she was still his mom, and he hoped she might one day come around. But as the wedding approached, things only got worse. Evelyn began calling and texting Mark, leaving him long voicemails where she begged him to reconsider, warning him that marrying me would be the biggest mistake of his life. She pleaded with him to choose Sarah instead. She said I would ruin him. Mark never wavered. He stood by me through all of it, even when Evelyn gave him an ultimatum. If he married me, he would no longer be her son. Mark was heartbroken, but he chose our love. He didn't let her threats stop him, and we went through with the wedding without her. It was a beautiful ceremony, filled with joy and love, but a shadow hung over it. Evelyn's empty seat and the knowledge that Mark's own mother had refused to be there. We tried to move forward, to build a life despite the loss of that relationship. But Evelyn didn't just miss the wedding. She never acknowledged our marriage, never visited our home, and when we had children, a son and a daughter, she refused to acknowledge them too. For 5 long years, she remained completely absent, clinging to her resentment like armor. Despite that, Mark and I built something wonderful together. His career flourished, we bought a beautiful home, and we raised 2 amazing kids. On the surface, life was good, but I always knew the pain of his mother's absence lingered inside Mark. He missed her, he loved her, and it broke his heart that she couldn't love us back. Then, just a few months ago, everything changed. Mark was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. came out of nowhere and moved faster than anyone expected. Despite every effort, the treatments didn't work, and his health declined quickly. In his final weeks, Mark tried one last time to reach out to Evelyn. He called, he messaged, he wanted peace. He wanted her to be there, to say goodbye, to meet her grandchildren. But she never responded. Mark died carrying that hurt with him. The pain of his mother's rejection never left him. He left this world with a broken heart, still waiting for the love she could never give. The day of Mark's funeral was one I had dreaded since we first received his diagnosis. Losing him had been the most heartbreaking experience of my life, and the idea of saying a final goodbye felt unbearable. The service was intimate, just close friends, relatives, and colleagues who truly knew and cared for Mark. I had made the conscious decision not to inform Evelyn about the funeral, certain that her presence would only add to the emotional strain of the day. But to my astonishment, she arrived anyway. She barged in with fury written all over her face, eyes burning with resentment. The room fell into stunned silence as she marched straight toward me, her voice laced with venom as she accused me of having no right to grieve. She said I had stolen her son and blamed me for his death. Her words cut like a knife, but I stood firm, understanding that her outburst was just a projection of her own guilt and sorrow. But Evelyn hadn't come alone. She demanded that we settle Mark's estate immediately, insisting that as his mother, she was entitled to a share of everything he left behind. She wanted answers, how much he had, where it was going, and what she could claim. I couldn't believe her nerve, but I wasn't shocked. Evelyn had always prioritized control and appearances over love or empathy. Thankfully, Mark had anticipated a move like this. Before he passed, he took careful steps to organize his affairs. He revised his will and left explicit instructions regarding the distribution of his estate. Everything had been handled legally and with clarity. I knew Evelyn was in for a harsh surprise, but I wasn't ready to confront her drama. Not during the funeral. I just wanted a peaceful goodbye and for our children to mourn their father in peace. I calmly handed Evelyn the folder Mark had prepared. She snatched it from my hands and ripped it open, but as she skimmed through the documents, her expression changed, from rage to shock, and finally to crushed silence. Mark had left her nothing but a letter. In it, he shared how deeply her behavior had wounded him over the years. He said that he had always wished they could make amends, but her refusal to accept our family left him with no other choice than to exclude her from his life. He made it absolutely clear that all of his belongings and wealth were to go to me and our children. He hoped, he wrote, that she would find peace in knowing that he had lived a fulfilling life, even without her in it. Evelyn's eyes welled with tears, and although I believed I had no compassion left for her, in that brief moment, something inside me softened. For the first time in years, I saw not the bitter, controlling woman who had driven a wedge between herself and her son, but someone who once had been a loving mother, now consumed by loss and guilt. But it was too late. Mark was gone. No apology or tearful realization could bring him back or mend what had been broken. Evelyn's pride and stubbornness had cost her the chance to say goodbye, and now, all she had left was regret. But as I stood to leave, her voice suddenly rang out sharply across the room. Why would you do this? For a second, I didn't register her words. I assumed it was just grief, maybe an outburst brought on by the raw emotions that funerals often stir. But then her tone sharpened, and the weight of her words took a turn I hadn't expected. The room was already steeped in sorrow, but Evelyn's outburst began to stir an uneasy energy among the mourners. I calmly approached her, speaking gently, trying to de-escalate the situation. I told her I understood that this was difficult for her, and reassured her that everything would be okay. But rather than settling down, she grew louder and more agitated. She accused me of stealing what was hers, claiming that I had taken everything from her, that I was the reason she had nothing left. Her voice, once trembling, now rang with fury. I glanced around and saw the guests beginning to look in our direction. Whispered conversations and concerned expressions were spreading through the room like wildfire. Still, I kept my composure and suggested that we speak privately after the funeral to resolve any concerns. I was still hoping to preserve what little dignity was left in this moment. But Evelyn wasn't interested in private conversations. Instead, her voice escalated to a dramatic pitch, filled with venom and bitterness. "I don't want your pity. I don't want anything from you," she shouted. Her words were no longer aimed at me. They were meant for everyone in the room. She turned her grief into a spectacle, drawing in the mourners as her audience. She pointed at me, claiming I had robbed her of everything Mark had left behind. According to her, I had hoarded the inheritance, refused to share a dime, and was now parading around as if I had done nothing wrong. As the eyes of the room shifted to me, some confused, others clearly judging, I realized Evelyn wasn't just grieving. She was performing. She wanted to shift the narrative, to cast herself as the victim in front of an audience full of sympathy. And worse, she was willing to tarnish her own son's memory, and mine, just to do it. The guests stood rooted in place, their expressions ranging from shock to discomfort. Some of them looked at me, wide-eyed, as if silently asking me to confirm or deny Evelyn's wild claims. I could feel their confusion pressing in from all sides, like a heavy fog. It was clear that Evelyn was trying to manipulate the narrative, to paint herself as the grieving mother wronged by her ungrateful daughter-in-law. And the worst part? Some of them were buying it. They didn't know the full story, the history, the pain that had preceded this moment. They only saw a woman in tears and a widow standing silently, trying to hold it all together. This was supposed to be a day of peace, a day to remember Mark for the kind, devoted man he was, not a circus of unresolved bitterness. I looked over at our children sitting quietly in the front row, their eyes big and uncertain. That was the moment I knew I had to protect not just Mark's memory, but our children from this chaos. I swallowed my anger, the lump rising in my throat, and forced myself to stay calm. As Evelyn's voice grew louder, a few of the guests began whispering, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. A few of our closer friends approached me with concerned looks, quietly offering help. But what could anyone really do? This wasn't just about finances or funeral arrangements. This was about years of rejection, about a woman who never forgave her son for making his own choices, and who now couldn't stand that she had been left out of his final chapter. I turned to Evelyn one last time and tried to speak, but her eyes were wild with emotion, locked on the crowd rather than me. She wasn't listening. She was performing, and in her face, I saw not grief, but a craving for control, a desperate attempt to make this moment about her. I stepped away, not out of weakness, but because I refused to let her steal this day too. I found one of the funeral directors, quietly asked them to help bring the guests back to their seats, and slowly walked toward the front of the room. I didn't look back. Evelyn's words continued to echo behind me, but I tuned them out. This day wasn't about proving myself or defending against baseless accusations. It was about Mark. It was about the love we shared, the life we built, and the goodbye he deserved. I wouldn't let anyone, not even his own mother, take that away from him. But the damage had already been done. Evelyn had made her scene, and I knew her words would echo long after the funeral ended. People would whisper, questions would be asked, and no matter how much I tried to block it out, some would believe her twisted version of the truth. The sorrow of saying goodbye to Mark was already overwhelming, but now it was laced with the humiliation and bitterness of the spectacle she had caused. Now, in the present, I feel completely lost. I've received countless opinions from people trying to advise me on what to do. Some believe I should just give Evelyn a portion of the inheritance to restore peace. But this isn't about money anymore. It's about the fact that my mother-in-law disrupted her own son's funeral simply because of her hatred toward me. She couldn't even stay silent long enough to lay him to rest with dignity. I'm conflicted. On one hand, I want to uphold Mark's wishes. He made them with clarity and intention, and protect what he left behind for me and our children. We built everything we had together. On the other hand, part of me wonders if giving Evelyn something, just enough to quiet her down, might make things easier. But would it truly bring peace? Or would it only fuel more drama down the line? I've tried to face this with as much composure as I can manage, but I don't know what the right next step is. I'm torn between honoring Mark's memory and attempting to avoid further conflict. What would you do if you were in my place? Should I give her a portion just to put an end to this feud? Or should I stay the course and respect what Mark wanted? Hi everyone. I wanted to share an update, though in truth not much has changed. If anything, things have only gotten worse. Since Mark passed, it feels like everything around me is collapsing. As if losing him wasn't painful enough, Evelyn has made it her personal mission to destroy whatever peace I had left. The drama she caused at the funeral was only the beginning, and what followed has been an ongoing nightmare. She's been spreading lie after lie to anyone who'll listen. Neighbors, extended family, even people from Mark's workplace. She tells them that Mark left everything to her, but that I tricked him into signing it all over to me. She claims I forged his will, manipulated him while he was vulnerable, and orchestrated it all to keep everything for myself. Evelyn's even gone as far as accusing me of isolating him when he was sick, of cutting her off and poisoning him slowly. The rumors are vile and exhausting, and they've taken such a toll on me that I don't even recognize my life anymore. I'm completely shocked. How can a mother spread such cruel lies about her late son's wife, especially after all we've been through? She shows no empathy toward me, no concern for my young children who are still struggling to understand that their father is gone. It feels like she's driven by some deep-rooted hatred, obsessed with making me pay in every possible way. The rumors she started have spiraled out of control. People I once trusted, those who comforted me at the funeral, are now distancing themselves. I'm getting bombarded with messages and texts, shaming me for how I've supposedly treated my mother-in-law. Comments like, "How could you do this to Evelyn after she lost her son?" Make it seem like I'm the villain here. It's as though everyone's forgotten that I'm mourning too, that my husband died, and my kids are growing up without their dad. The stress is unbearable. I can't sleep properly, and when I do, nightmares of Mark and flashes of our old life jolt me awake. I spend every day trying to keep my head above water, fielding cruel messages, dodging calls, and doing my best to keep my kids away from the poison Evelyn has unleashed. I'm drained, mentally, physically, emotionally. I just want the space to mourn and somehow find a way to move forward for my children. But with Evelyn constantly on the attack, it feels impossible. And it hasn't stopped at gossip. Evelyn has crossed every line. She's come to our house without warning, pounding on the door, screaming for me to hand over Mark's estate. She's hurled accusations at me, calling me a liar, a thief, even worse. She's threatened legal action, saying she'll make sure I walk away with nothing. The fear is constant. I never know when she'll show up again. I've had to involve the police multiple times, but it doesn't stop her. Her obsession is frightening, and I feel trapped in this nightmare. I'm at a breaking point. I've thought about filing for a restraining order, but I worry how that might affect the kids. They've already been through so much, and I don't want to make things harder. But at the same time, I can't keep pretending everything is okay. It's not. The only thing that's kept me going is the support I've found here. Your kind words and encouragement have been my lifeline in all of this. Knowing that some people still believe me, still see the truth, has helped me survive when I felt like I couldn't anymore. Thank you for being that light in the dark. I'm torn and overwhelmed. A part of me wants to stand up and take legal action against Evelyn, to bring everything into the open and show the court that her accusations are completely false. I have the paperwork, clear proof that Mark intended for me and our kids to be secure. I know I'm in the right, but then there's another side of me that just wants to surrender, to give her what she's demanding just so she'll finally back off and let us live in peace. But deep down, I realize that no matter what I give her, it will never satisfy her. Evelyn will just find another excuse to cause pain, another way to punish me for being the woman Mark chose. I feel stuck, like every option leads to more pain. I'm trying to hold it together for the kids, but every day feels like an uphill battle I'm losing. I replay everything over and over in my head, wondering if there was something I could have done to change the outcome, anything that could have made this less heartbreaking. But the reality is, I can't go back and fix what's already happened, and I have no clear idea how to navigate what's happening now. I'm taking things one step at a time, but it's exhausting. especially when it feels like each new day brings another attack from Evelyn or someone she's managed to sway to her side. I feel completely alone in this. I'm trying to be strong, but sometimes it feels like I'm hanging on by a thread, and it terrifies me because I know falling apart isn't an option right now. Not when so much depends on me. I just want it all to stop. I wish I could wake up and find Mark still beside me, like none of this ever happened. But I know that can't happen. So somehow I have to find a way to keep going. For me and for our children. I just don't know how to move forward when everything around me feels like it's crumbling. I'm so grateful for the support I've received. It means more than I could ever express. I'll try to share updates as things unfold. But right now, I'm just doing my best to get through each day. If anyone out there has advice or encouragement, I would truly appreciate it. Because honestly, I'm lost. Hello, everyone. I wanted to share that I've finally followed through on the advice many of you offered. I've reached my breaking point with Evelyn's relentless behavior, and I refuse to let her toxic presence rule my life any longer. After all the emotional havoc she's caused, I came to the realization that I needed to draw a line. I reached out to a trusted friend of mine, who also happens to be a lawyer, and we're now pursuing legal action against Evelyn. I'm officially suing her for harassment, emotional trauma, defamation of character, and trespassing due to her repeated uninvited visits to my home, where she screamed, pounded on the door, and disrupted the peace of my household. My lawyer believes we have a rock-solid case. The evidence is extensive and damning. For starters, Evelyn has sent me an endless stream of messages, texts and voicemails, each one dripping with false accusations, threats, and manipulative pleas. These alone show just how consistent and aggressive her behavior has been. Beyond that, we have security footage from my home that captures every moment she's shown up unannounced, trying to barge her way inside or loitering on my property. The footage is crystal clear and demonstrates the level of intrusion we've had to deal with. With everything documented, we've officially filed the lawsuit and served Evelyn with a legal notice. It was an emotional but empowering step, one that symbolized the beginning of reclaiming my life from the chaos she's brought into it. I expected some blowback, and I'm sure more will come. But what I didn't expect was the overwhelming support I received once word got out. It was heartening, to say the least. At the same time, I decided to finally address the people who had been judging and criticizing me based on Evelyn's false narrative. I went through a few of the messages I had gotten recently and responded to the most hurtful ones, including one from Mark's aunt. Her message had been particularly cruel. She accused me of dishonoring Mark's memory and stealing what she called Evelyn's inheritance. It cut deep, especially since she had once been a close family friend. In my reply, I laid it all out. I reminded her that while everyone had rushed to comfort Evelyn in her grief, not a single person had stopped to consider that I had lost my husband, the man I loved deeply. I told her how I'd been quietly trying to hold my family together while navigating a grief that was unbearable. I explained the truth, that Mark had made his final wishes known, that he had taken every step to ensure his family would be cared for, and that Evelyn's claims were complete fabrications. And then I ended the message with clarity. I would not be explaining myself again to anyone. Going forward, I asked that everyone who had doubted me simply stay away. I needed space to heal, and more importantly, I needed to protect my children from the poison of this drama. Sending those messages wasn't easy, but it brought me a sense of relief I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time since Mark passed, I felt like I had regained a little piece of the control I had lost, and that, to me, was the first step toward peace. To my surprise, it looks like Mark's aunt actually listened to what I said. She must have passed it on to the rest of the family, because within a few hours, I was flooded with a wave of new messages. But this time, they weren't filled with blame, they were full of apologies. People who had so quickly turned their backs on me were now reaching out to admit they had been wrong. Many of them said they had blindly believed Evelyn's side of the story without even stopping to think about what I was going through. A few confessed they had been caught up in the emotion of it all and hadn't taken the time to question whether her accusations made sense. Finally, it felt like the truth was starting to surface, and some of the damage that had been done was beginning to be undone. I won't lie and say everything is fine now, because it's not. Losing Mark has left a wound that still hasn't healed, and I know it's going to take a long time before it does. But at least I'm not being painted as the villain anymore. It's comforting to know that those who truly matter to me have started to understand the truth and are standing by my side again. Their support has made a huge difference, especially in moments when I felt like giving up. Right now, I'm doing everything I can to keep moving forward, for myself and for my kids, and trying to stay hopeful as we continue with the legal process. I want nothing more than for all of this to end in a way that brings some peace to our lives. To everyone who's been following this journey and sending words of comfort, advice, and strength, thank you. Your encouragement has helped me stay grounded and strong through one of the hardest chapters of my life. You've reminded me that I'm not alone, and I'll never be able to express how much that means to me. I'll continue to keep you all in the loop as things unfold, but for now, I'm taking each day as it comes and doing my best to stay hopeful for a brighter tomorrow. Hey everyone, I hope you've all been doing okay. It's been a little while since I last checked in, but something important has happened recently, and I felt like it was time to share an update. Just a day or two after we officially filed the lawsuit, I received an email from Evelyn. In it, she claimed to be truly sorry for everything that's happened.